What's happening, everybody? Earl Campbell here from Eastern Shore Undercover. And today we're on here doing another podcast. This time it's a little bit different. We have a special guest with us here tonight. Miss Erika Corry has joined us. And we are going to talk about an incident that happened about a year ago. We're coming up on a year ago, in July of 2025. I spoke with Erika, this last week. We were chatting about an incident that happened, and I said, it'd be a great way to sit down and have a chat about it online, let the community know what happened. And Erika, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you for joining us. Could you give us a little brief description of what happened? So a basis of, what happened in July of 2025.
Sure. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having me, Earl. It gives us a platform to talk about our experiences because it's so important to share with others who I know have gone through similar or different, but all just really troubling experiences within Wicomico County. So what kind of is the synopsis of last summer was a lot of people know there was a vandalism of a local sod farm here in Wicomico County. And so they were on the lookout for the perpetrators. They kind of knew what the vehicles looked like, what type of vehicles they were. And unfortunately, my son has a very similar vehicle to that. So he just had an unfortunate experience of calling me up one morning after the event occurred and said, "Hey, Mom, I've run out of gas right down the street from where he worked, which is by the Wicomico County landfill." But he made it to work. And so later that morning, I left work to go get him some gas and pick him up so he could, take his truck back to work and be able to finish out the day and drive himself home. Unfortunately, the day took a very bad turn as that kind of unfolded around lunchtime on July 24th, 2025.
Now, the truck, your son's truck, I'm assuming it matched a similar description of what they were looking for?
Well, considering what I remember is the description of the truck was white. It was dirty. And may or may not have been lifted. And if you've driven around Wicomico County, there are a lot of white, dirty trucks, especially in that teenager kind of generation, because they have dirty trucks and a lot of them are white. It's a very popular color.
If you go to Buffalo Wild Wings on any given Saturday, you'll see probably 10 or 15 of them.
Yes.
So what happens next? He runs out of gas. He calls you. And then what happens?
So what happened was I picked him up from work, and our intention was to go to the, it's not a Wawa, but the gas station right there, 7-Eleven, to fill up, get him some gas. But as we drove past where his truck had been parked that morning on the side of the road, there were some deputy cars, there were some other cars. And so we pulled over, obviously, to try and get an understanding of what was going on and kind of claim like, hey, this is his truck. And figure out what the situation was, because it was alarming. It was alarming to drive past and see all of that commotion, all of those people around the vehicle, checking it out and kind of going, what's going on? So,
and at that time, I'm just assuming, but did you have any idea of what they were around the truck for?
Initially, no. I mean, I had heard of the incident. We had talked to our son about the incident. And so at the time, it didn't occur to me. As we're getting out, I think reality starts to dawn and you start to get that sinking feeling in your gut of, oh, this is probably not going to be good. So with that realization, obviously we stepped over to it. We started talking to the deputy on the scene. And just trying to get an idea, show our IDs, the typical stuff. But I won't go into a whole lot of detail about the investigation part, only because it's still kind of an unresolved issue between my family and the deputy's department. So a lot of the story that I want to tell is about the treatment that was received by myself and my son later on in the day.
Okay. And who was that from? Is it from the sheriff's department?
Well, actually, kind of one of the points I'd wanted to make is there was, what my story is not a reflection of the entire department. There's some great men and women that work there, and I can name, the deputy investigator that was in charge of everything, and he was phenomenal. He is the only one that day who I felt treated my son and I with respect, that listened to us, made us feel heard. And when I left that night, if it had not been for him, I would have had absolutely zero hope to sleep that night. So for that, he was a blessing in a really difficult time and a really scary time. But ultimately, what happened involved the leadership of that deputy's department. It was the leader who, in my opinion, stepped out of bounds, who was unprofessional, who was uncaring, who had an agenda. And we were kind of put into that role to fulfill the agenda that I think he had. And my son was someone he was willing to sacrifice for that agenda.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Right. Without going into the details, just so we're clear, your son has been cleared, so there's no pending charges or anything like that lingering out there.
No, absolutely. He was cleared as a suspect the next day. We honestly, my family, his girlfriend's family, they gave all of the evidence needed to clear him within an hour of this, that whole incident. Unfortunately, I understand the deputies have to do due process and they have to do their job. That's just, and they did that. And I'm grateful that they did that. And so the events that we're going to talk about, the interaction I had with the sheriff, never needed to occur. Had he trusted his men to do their job and come out with the right answer in the end, it would have been a much different experience. But he did not allow that to happen. He stepped in, he made the situation 110 times worse, and he left myself as just a mom in despair and a bit traumatized with what he said, the way he made me feel. And the perception that he left was a true experience that I wouldn't want anyone in our community to have. I'm grateful that I was able to stand up and fight for my son and advocate for him, because there's so many moms or dads and family members that may not have been able to speak out. And so half of what I do is for them.
One more thing just before, so the people know, so they don't think, we're overstepping. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your son is a juvenile, or was a juvenile at the time when this happened.
Thank goodness he was. Thank goodness. Yep. He, so the incident happened on July 24th. His 18th birthday is July 28th. So we were 4 days shy of his 18th birthday. And that was very clearly explained to me, that had 4 days gone past and had this been on or after his 18th birthday, it would have been an even worse experience based on the threats that were presented to my husband and I around that birth date.
Yeah. Let's go back to the conversations that you had with Sheriff Lewis. Are you able to talk about that? I know there's some other stuff that's going on. Are you able to talk about the conversations and how you were treated? Basically, how you felt while you were there and when you were leaving from your interactions with Sheriff Lewis.
Yeah, I feel that I can talk about it and I can share my experience. It was not something that was recorded. It's not part of the investigation. It was actually started out as a request. So my husband was out of town for the day, and so I was dealing with this situation on my own. So after they confiscated the vehicle, we went back to the sheriff's office in order to supply video footage, Ring camera footage from our home, Life 360 from his girlfriend's phone, Ring cameras from his girlfriend's family's home, where he was accountable for the entire day. And so I wanted to make sure I presented that to just make this be a smooth situation, a misunderstanding, and fight for him and just advocate that he is not the person you think he is, and he's not the one that did this. And so we got our evidence. We went right back to the sheriff's department. We let them know that we were there. We sat in that very large, brand new waiting room and just kind of waited for our turn, for someone to come out and talk to us and, collect the evidence that we knew we had that absolutely cleared our son from the situation, from being on the suspect list, and all of that. Because if you think about it, Earl, there's not a whole lot of things in life that scare a mom to death. This is one of them. So there's a lot of things. Well, there's a couple things that really, I think when you think about motherhood, fatherhood, situations you don't ever want to be in, and the police after your child is kind of at the top of that list.
Absolutely.
So it was a very frightening situation, one I'd never been in. I myself had never walked into the sheriff's department. At 45 years old, I've never been in trouble with the law. I can't remember the last time I had a speeding ticket or anything like that. So to be in that situation was brand new for me. It was an unknown. I had no background experience or knowledge in how to handle something like that. And I truly had a very naive trust in the system. I believed it worked. I believed what I saw on the radio. I believed what I saw on Fox News. And so as we were sitting there waiting for our turn to speak to the detective, my husband was on the phone. He said, "Honey, just ask to speak to Sheriff Lewis. Ask to have a conversation with him, a meeting with him, just kind of be able to explain the situation and get some understanding." And, at the time, he felt like he would be an advocate, someone that could help us or just make us feel confident in the process and that things were going to shake out the way they were meant to shake out. And so I did that. I asked one of the deputies, I said, "Hey, can I please have a meeting with Sheriff Lewis just to talk it out?" And I think to leave feeling a little bit better and a little confident that justice would be served and that we would be heard. And unfortunately, that is not what happened at all. And so that's kind of where the rest of the story comes from. It's where things went downhill really, really fast to where you almost feel like it's an out-of-body experience because you're like, is this really happening? And am I really being told this stuff? So if we want to jump to that, Sheriff Lewis at some point did come out. And of course, I have my son there. So I went back with him by myself. As we went back to his office, I believe his second in command came out of his office. So it was myself and two men that went into his office with the closed door. And I thank my gut and my instincts to ask if I can put my husband on speakerphone because it was a lifesaver. There's no way, looking back, that I would have been able to handle that conversation by myself. Honestly, as a female, as a mom who was already scared, and I'm glad he was there to, be that male, strong father figure.
Before you tell the details of the conversation with you and Sheriff Lewis, if you had to do it all over again, would you go back into that meeting with him again?
I'd like to believe I would go into that meeting again. There was a purpose to that, and I don't feel that his father and I did anything wrong in asking for that meeting. We had this expectation from what we had heard publicly about the sheriff is that it would be a good conversation. It would be a conversation where we could sort of tell our side for what we knew at the time and kind of feel things out and get a better understanding of what to expect from this point forward. Unfortunately, that conversation did not go at all as anticipated or as we had expected, being that we had asked for it. So as we sat down to talk, I let my husband take the lead, and him and Sheriff Lewis kind of approached the subject of why we were in the office in the first place.
Once you got back there, what was talked about? What happened when you were with the sheriff?
Sure. So that conversation was quite unexpected. We sat down, we opened up into the conversation, and the sheriff took that opportunity to, one, compare our son to the man who kidnapped, raped, and murdered that poor little girl, Sarah Foxwell. He also told us that he had all the evidence he felt he needed to throw our son into a cold, hard cell. And there was no changing his mind. He was very adamant that He
Mm-hmm.
had the perpetrator. He told us that the sod farm owners were a good family and they deserve justice. And that to me said, and your son does not. You and your family
Right.
don't deserve, justice or anything. He had his
Mm.
person, and that's all he cared about. In his mind,
Wow.
of course.
So if we can, I'm a little confused. I'm blown away by your answer, and it took me back a little bit. So he actually compares your son to Thomas Legs, who was the murderer of Sarah Foxwell, who everyone here on the Eastern Shore is familiar with. How did that even come about, and what was the comparison?
So I don't know why she was brought into the conversation, but what I do know is that he told us that that perpetrator denied it to the very end and compared that to our son telling us that he didn't do the sod farm vandalism. Even if you take that part out of it, how do you take a horrific incident, murder of a little girl, and compare that to someone doing donuts in a sod farm?
Right.
There's such incomparable incidences that it's mind-blowing for someone, let alone the sheriff, to compare the two as if there is anything in common between those two incidents.
Yeah. And I can't imagine as a parent being told that. It's got to be a horrific feeling. So
Yeah,
sorry you had.
you're basically told by someone that your child is as terrible and as much of a criminal as a murderer of a little girl. So at the end of that meeting, what I very clearly remember, and sometimes can relive it, is standing up. Adam had already hung up the phone, and the call had ended. And so Mike Lewis got to the door before I did, opened it, and as I walked towards him, he turned to me and he said, "Just let your son know that he can come in here like a man and he can make this right with me." And so I responded. I don't even remember thinking about my response, just kind of reacting in the moment and said, what do you mean by that?
Right.
And he looked at me and just reiterated, he can come in here and he can make it right with me. And I said, so you want my son to come in here and admit to something that he didn't do? And he was kind of, in my opinion, taken aback. I could kind of see him react in a form of kind of like, oh. And so he reiterated again for the third time that my son could come in here, make it right. But if he's innocent and didn't do it, then he can stick with his guns. So he can admit to
Erika,
it, or...
Can I ask you something real quick? At that point, did he have like the videos and the evidence that you spoke about, the ring cam? Did he have any of that at this point?
At this point, he did. And I remember showing it to the detectives and telling them, hey, I have the ring camera. I had found it, saved the time slot. I had even asked one of the deputies, I think he was the supervisor, what is the time frame that we're looking at? Because I wanted to be sure that I had all of the video to show that my son was nowhere near that location. And so I was very confident in what I had. I was confident in the Life 360 that his girlfriend had. And we had shown that, and we had told the detectives very clearly that we have this. And so I also recall the first time I saw Mike Lewis in the station, and he was talking behind the door, and there's a glass you can see through it. And he was talking to the gentleman that we had told that to. So, there's no reason that he didn't know the evidence that we had provided. More than happy to provide it. Like, I'll do anything. What do you need? I'll give it, I'll find it. I'll give it to you. I will share it, all of that. Just let me help. Just let me help clear my son's name. And so when we went back into that meeting with him in his office, my impression was that he had that information. And so I obviously thought the conversation was going to go very different. I thought it was going to be one of compassion. I thought it was one of maybe understanding, hey, what is it, you want to talk about? He never let us talk. He never let me say a word until the very end. It was a one-sided conversation, and it was aggressive, and it was there was just no equal communication in that. He knew what he knew. He felt he had what he had, and it didn't matter what we had and what we showed and what we gave them. And so we left the office, and I just remember being really confused. I remember the feeling of fear, because this is my baby. You know, this is my child that I have put 17 and a half years of my life, my love, my tears, my energy. My husband has done the same. And he was in a great place. And I remember coming out of that back, and he's still sitting in the waiting room. And as I crossed the waiting room, he looks up at me, and I remember saying to him, they think you did it and they don't care. And honestly, Mike Lewis thinks you did it and he doesn't care. And that is a terrible, terrible, gut-wrenching feeling, and something that you honestly had to tell your child. So we continued to sit, we continued to wait. I remember feeling ill. I remember all of that anxiety, that stress, that fear going right to your inside and just feeling awful. But I wasn't going to leave. I was going to wait until I spoke to someone and I had some clarity. And so that's where the other investigative deputy came in, and where he did a good job, and he did a great job, and he did his job. And he was just kind, and he was a good person, and he made me feel heard. When I had been silenced by the sheriff, he made me feel heard, and I'm very grateful for him, because I was able to get a little bit of sleep that night. So that's kind of where that day ended. But we spent probably 5 or more hours in that waiting room, just waiting, and went home with no answer.
Was your opinion of Mike Lewis different going in than it was leaving?
Oh my goodness. I'm not embarrassed of how I felt and what I thought, because I tend to always see the best in people when, you know, I don't know them or I haven't had an experience with them. And so I understand where a lot of Wicomico County voters are mentally, why they believe the great things that they believe about him, because I was that person, 11 months ago. And I went in there with so much faith and with so much hope, and an impression that, hey, this is going to be okay. Like, I'm going to talk to the sheriff and it's going to be fine, because that's what he is on TV. And that's the impression that he gives. And so what I saw was the real, and I believe the real Mike Lewis. And when you have that experience and you can talk about it from a very personal place, it's not hearsay. It's not someone else's story. It's not taking something out of context. This was my experience, and that's my reality. And so I can share that with people, and it's amazing how many people I've opened up to, and they've had similar stories or similar emotions that were created by our sheriff. And I know it's kind of funny, and you don't want to say it because it's kind of a kid thing to say, but there truly is those of us who have drank the lemonade or the Kool-Aid, and we believe what we see in front of the camera and on TV, and the perception that they want us to know, think, and feel. And then there's those who have actually experienced the other side, who feel like the blinds have been removed, the water's been cleared up, and we see things in a much different perspective, in a very real perspective.
It actually becomes hard to believe. It's hard to convince yourself at times. I mean, I can speak from my experience as well, that, you know, when I had my issues initially start with him, I didn't want to believe it, because me coming from a law enforcement background, like, I thought he was like the second coming of Christ. I mean, he was everything. He was the main guy in law enforcement. So I totally get what you feel, and it's not a good feeling.
It's not. The disappointment and what you get. It's kind of like that present, right? At Christmas, it's all wrapped so pretty on the outside, and then you open it up, and it's just disappointment with what's inside.
Yeah.
And so, it didn't actually end there, which is
Right.
the crazy part. So that actually is a 2-day event for us as a family. And, to go over the next day, which I think was actually where it went from fear, intimidation, coercion to just flat out insult is,
Yeah.
where
Now,
he continued to
that
go.
first day, you didn't know that he was cleared at that point. You were still afraid, and your son, I'm sure, was probably very nervous, not knowing what's going to happen for the first day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When we left that day, they had his truck, they had his cell phone. They told me, they being the deputies in charge of the investigation, told me that they were going to get a search warrant, no problem, and that I would find out in the morning what the decision on that was. So that's where it was left Thursday evening when we left. They had his things. We were just supposed to wait until the morning, and they were going to talk to, the lawyer they needed to get the search warrant that they presented as no problem because, they had everything. They had all the evidence they needed to lock my son in a cold, hard cell.
Well, as a juvenile, that wouldn't have happened, but they'll tell people that. So what happened on the next day?
So the next day, the investigator, he kept his word. He called me, and I was actually surprised. It was pretty early in the morning. I would say it was maybe around 9:30-ish, which to me was kind of early in the day. Usually when someone says, I'll call you the next day, we're at least talking post-lunch.
Right.
So he called me, and he said, yep, you can come get your son's phone and truck. Which I kind of thought was odd. No extra details. You're not going to tell me, did you get a warrant? Didn't you get a warrant? What's going on? So I questioned him. I said, so were you able to get a warrant or not? And he was like, no, we weren't able to get a warrant. So we went and picked up his things. My husband was able to go with me that day, which was really nice. The demeanor was very different. When we went Friday, I was kind of felt like I was slapped. Because I was the one that was there the day before, but I was not getting all the attention and the kindness that I felt like I had deserved, Right. So anyway, that's just a personal thing. But we got there. Demeanor was very different with the deputies. Honestly, very apologetic to how things had gone the day before. And what we did is we didn't tell our son. He was at work and we wanted to surprise him. So we went to the deputy's sheriff department. We went to get his truck. We went to get his phone and had a very long conversation with the investigators, asked questions that we had, expressed concerns that clearly we had from the day before. And my husband, again, requested a meeting with Sheriff Mike Lewis because he hadn't really been there in person, obviously, the day before. And he had some concerns he wanted to share. So they took that, said, we'll let you know if he becomes available. We left the building. I don't even think we got to Route, was that 50 before we got a phone call that Sheriff Lewis was available to meet with us. And could we come back to the department? And so we turned around, of course, and I immediately got sick to my stomach because this did not go well the day before. And I really did not. I was scared to go back into that office.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I was. I even remember asking my husband, do I have to go? Can you just handle this? And so he said no. So I went, but I was scared. I was sick to my stomach, scared to go back into that office because it had been so honestly traumatic the day before, and I did not know how this was going to go. So, but we went into the office, and the part that, it was a very short conversation that day. I can tell you on the 25th, he initially, Sheriff Lewis apologized very quickly. and then said that had myself and my son cooperated and not been combative with his deputies, it would have been a much different experience. And I don't even think I processed it, because if you know me, you know that does not describe me at all. And I remember I'm trying to work with them, trying to get information, trying to be cooperative, like intentionally cooperative, because I truly believe you get more with sugar than vinegar. So I'm not going to, make matters worse by being disrespectful or combative or aggressive or anything like that. I was just doing my motherly duty, and that was, advocating for my son, which is what I do every day for both of our children. So to know that he's in the wrong and that he treated us so horribly, to have that turned around, that I was the antagonist in this situation, that's where the insulting part came. That took a while to process. That you had the audacity to turn everything around and blame me for it, when all I was doing was my duty as a mom to protect my child from very bad behavior by a leader of this community who we're supposed to trust, who we're supposed to have faith in. And that faith was broken that day. And I'm not afraid to tell other people my story, because I fear for those who don't have the strength to, talk back and fight back and stand up for their loved ones for whatever reason that is. And so it's just, the faith was just broken that day.
And the sad part is about that, thankfully your son was a juvenile, but had it been 4 days later, he would have probably been charged, and you would have had to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to get an attorney and fight your way out of your son getting the first criminal charge he's ever had on his, adult rap sheet.
I mean, I honestly haven't been able to go there, because it went so bad when he was innocent and he was 17, that what would that experience have been like? Would he have been found, guilty out of convenience? Would he have served time? Would it have ruined his future? He was on track. He graduated high school early. He works his butt off, and it could have derailed him. And that's the selfish part to what the sheriff did. His dad and I and our son had worked so hard to get to where he was, which is a respected individual of this community. He works hard. He has goals in life. And the sheriff had no qualms about derailing all that we had worked for as a family. And you could have absolutely destroyed his future had this gone the way the sheriff wanted it to go. And that was, he wanted his person behind bars. It didn't matter who it was. That's what I believe. It didn't matter who it was. He just wanted someone in those handcuffs, and someone that he could name on the next, TV camera to say he got the culprit for a company that just coincidentally happened to donate thousands and thousands and thousands of free sod to the brand new sheriff department. So think what you want, but there's some connection there, whether you like it or not. And my son, he was willing to sacrifice for that agenda, and that's not okay.
No, it's not. So after that day, was there any other communications with the sheriff following that event, or has there been any?
No, there has been no, there's been nothing. It was like, besides, some requests for information on the investigation and the steps that were taken, there has been no communication. There's been no additional follow-up, apology, anything. It's almost like it happened, but you're just supposed to pretend like it didn't happen. You're supposed to act like it's that behavior is okay, it's acceptable, it's justified. And I think there's been I would imagine too many citizens who have experienced that and they've been quiet about it. He just finally found, I think, someone who's willing to speak out and is respected enough in this community and has worked very hard in this community, is from this community, to be brave enough to say something and to share their story and their experience.
Well, I definitely appreciate you sharing it with us. As soon as we talked the other night, I said, it's a great way to get the story out there, and so you guys could share your story in front of most of Wicomico County. We'll probably see this in the next day or two.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you wanted to put out there?
I think I covered everything. Like, I just want people to know that this is our story. This is our experience. There's others like it. We just need to kind of talk about it. And I know that my experience, my son's experience, my husband's experience, we are not the worst ones to talk about. I don't claim to have the worst experience, the worst outcome. And I'm sad for those who have experienced worse. And I hope that they will find the confidence, the strength to speak up, to speak out, and to share their story, because they're all important. And what they all have in common is one person, and they're all events, they're all experiences that never should have happened. There's absolutely no reason, when you have a very capable department of individuals who are great at what they do, they're professionals, they're the best of the best in our area, there's absolutely no reason for any of us to have these stories.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my end is, it's wrong. It just shouldn't have happened. It's unacceptable. You're out of, an elected official, out of the leader of one of, our organizations here in Wicomico County, one of our departments. You would not allow that behavior, treatment of its citizens from any other office in this county.
No, absolutely.
But it's tolerated. And the more people you talk to, the more you realize it's a tolerated behavior that's kept behind closed doors. And that's unacceptable in our county. And it needs to change.
Yep. Well, I thank you for coming on here and spending the last hour with us. I hope you and your husband and your son can move past this, and maybe we'll who knows, maybe we'll have a different sheriff here come 4 months, 5 months from now. We'll see. So
that would be,
thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and just listening and allowing me to be heard.
Absolutely. That's all we got for you here today, folks, from the Eastern Shore Undercover podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Miss Erika Corry, telling her story about her and her family and how they were affected by an incident here in Wicomico County. Have a great night, folks.